He wished death on my pets all night, then cried when I finally snapped. Did I go too far? Imagine being at a birthday party, minding your own business, just talking about the pets you love, and some guy you have never met in your life looks you dead in the eye and tells you they should be killed with fire. Not that he is scared of them. Not that he finds them weird. He said they do not deserve to live on the same earth as him. That is where this story starts, and it gets so much worse before it gets better. This is a 17-year-old kid who has poured genuine love and care into animals that most people would not even touch. He has spent real time and real money building enclosures, researching proper care, learning feeding schedules, reading everything he can get his hands on, and quietly developing a bond with creatures that the rest of the world either ignores or recoils from. And this stranger decided that was a good reason to ruin an entire evening. So our narrator, we will call him just that, the narrator, keeps scorpions, centipedes and tarantulas. Now before anyone closes the tab, hear this out, because the way he talks about these animals tells you everything you need to know about who he is as a person. He says they are heavily misunderstood. He says they are more scared of people than people are of them. He says every single one of them has a unique personality and that he has taken real time to train them and learn who they are. He talks about the way a tarantula moves differently depending on its mood, the way a scorpion learns to associate his presence with safety rather than threat. These are not decorative props sitting in a tank. They are living creatures he has observed and understood over months and years of patient attention. This is not a kid doing something edgy for attention. This is someone who genuinely found a passion that most people do not share and leaned all the way into it with his whole heart. He even says he has a thick skin about it. He is used to people being uncomfortable or confused or even a little grossed out. He gets it. He is not walking into rooms expecting everyone to be thrilled that he keeps an 8-legged collection at home. He probably gets the jokes. He has probably heard every variation of them. He accepts that it is unusual and he moves on with a shrug rather than a defense. That level of maturity at 17 is actually kind of remarkable when you think about it, because most people that age take every bit of pushback personally and either get defensive or give up what they love. He did neither. He just kept going, kept loving his animals, and developed the kind of quiet confidence that comes from genuinely not needing other people to validate what makes you happy. There is something grounding about that. When you build your sense of self around something real rather than around other people's approval, you become much harder to shake. That is what he had walking into that party. So he is at this birthday party for a family member he has literally never met before. A 21-year-old we are calling John. The scene is exactly what you would picture. People gathered in someone's home, food on a table somewhere, maybe music low in the background, the slightly awkward energy of relatives and their plus ones trying to find common ground with strangers. When the introductions start going around and he brings up his pets, the room gets curious. People lean in. People ask questions. There are probably a few raised eyebrows and some nervous laughs, but that is normal because unusual hobbies are interesting and most people, even if they are a little squeamish, can at least appreciate someone else's passion when it is explained with enthusiasm. But not John. John hears the word scorpion and decides that this is his moment to perform for the room. He does not ask a question. He does not even make a face and walk away. He tells this kid, someone he has known for approximately 4 minutes, that his pets should be killed with fire. That they do not deserve to exist on the same planet as John. And then, as if that was not enough, he says they are only good as food. Now pause on that for a second. This is a birthday party. These are people meeting for the first time. And this grown 21-year-old man decided that the correct way to introduce himself to a new family member was to announce that someone else's beloved pets deserved to die. He said it loudly enough for people nearby to hear. He said it with the casual confidence of someone who has never once been told that his words have weight. That is not a phobia response. That is not even rude awkwardness. That is something else entirely, and it does not take long before the rest of the night reveals exactly what kind of person John is. Okay, but telling someone to kill their pets within the first 5 minutes of meeting them. That is a personality, and not a good one. The narrator, to his credit, walks away. He feels the frustration rising, hot and immediate, the kind of anger that sits behind your eyes and makes everything slightly too bright. He can see that everyone around him noticed it too. He can feel the second-hand discomfort in the air as people suddenly find somewhere else to look. Conversations drop half a volume. Someone reaches for their drink for no reason other than to have something to do with their hands. But he makes the choice to remove himself rather than escalate. That is the right call, and it says something real about who he is. Because the easy thing to do in that moment is to fire back immediately and make a scene right there in front of everyone. He did not do that. He swallowed it, stepped away, and tried to enjoy the rest of the party. He probably found someone else to talk to, tried to reset, told himself it was just one person having one bad moment and that the evening did not have to go sideways because of it. The problem is that John was not done. Because John keeps coming back. Not once, not twice, but every so often throughout the entire night, John is walking up to this kid to remind him that his pets should die. Picture what that actually looks like in practice. The narrator is in the middle of a different conversation, maybe finally starting to relax, and John materializes beside him again with that same energy, that same look on his face, like he has been saving this up. He is describing, and this part is genuinely disturbing, how it would be fun to watch them squirm while they drown. He is lingering on the details of it with something that sounds less like a joke and more like a fantasy. He is calling them just bugs as if that dismissal somehow makes the cruelty more acceptable. He is grinning when he says it, or not grinning, and somehow that is worse. He keeps going back to the same person, at a party, specifically to needle them about something they clearly care about. That is not a casual dislike of spiders. That is targeted harassment. There is a difference between saying something offensive once and then moving on and returning to the same person repeatedly throughout a social event to make sure they know you want their animals to die. What John is doing is deliberate. It is intentional. And it is designed to get a reaction. But here is the thing that really fills in the full picture of who John is. Because it turns out the pets were not even the worst of it. John spent that same night mocking the narrator's girlfriend for a medical condition she is deeply sensitive about. Let that land. He found out this girl has something going on with her health, something she struggles with, something she is vulnerable about, and he used it to make fun of her. In front of people. At a family gathering. Think about what it takes to hear that someone is dealing with a health condition and immediately weaponize it for a laugh. That is not thoughtlessness. Thoughtlessness would be changing the subject too fast or asking an awkward question. What John did was look at her vulnerability and decide it was useful to him. Then he called the narrator's sister a whore. Then he called the narrator's mom a dinosaur. This is not a person having a bad night. This is a person who scans a room, identifies what people care about or feel insecure about, and then uses it as ammunition. That is not rudeness. That is something calculated and mean at its core. The fact that his own mother explained it away by saying he has been like this since his dad left is honestly one of the most revealing details in this whole story. She said it the way you say something you have been saying for years, worn smooth from repetition, like a phrase that used to feel like an explanation and now just feels like a reflex. Because it explains where the behavior came from without excusing it for even a second. Pain does not give you the right to make other people bleed. A difficult childhood does not entitle you to spend your 20s tearing down every person around you. Lots of people lose parents. Lots of people go through things that could harden them into someone cruel. Most of them make a different choice. They do the work. They sit with the hurt instead of exporting it to everyone in the room. John has not made that choice yet, and everyone around him is paying the price for it. You have got to give the narrator credit for holding it together as long as he did. Most adults would have snapped well before this point. So when the narrator finally goes off, what does he actually say? He tells John he has no right to decide something should not live because it looks strange. He points out that John is a gaunt little freak who looks more alien than any of his eight-legged friends. He draws the parallel to John's own rabbit and asks how John would feel if someone said they wanted to make a stew out of it. He calls out the core hypocrisy right there, that John has spent the entire night declaring that certain lives are worth less simply because he does not understand or appreciate them, while presumably expecting everyone to treat his own rabbit with respect. The air in that room must have shifted the moment those words landed, because suddenly John was not performing for an audience anymore. He was the subject of the story. Every person in that room who had been quietly seething for hours had something to look at. And the narrator was not done. He kept going, precise and unflinching, until every point was made. And then he calls John what he is. A misogynistic, miserable turd. And every single one of those words was earned over the course of that evening. John ends up leaving his own birthday party. His girlfriend gets left behind, so upset and embarrassed that he storms off without her. Think about what it means to abandon your own girlfriend at your own birthday party because someone finally said something true about you. That is not the exit of a person who knows they were wronged. That is the exit of a person who cannot stand being seen clearly. The narrator finds out afterwards that roughly 95% of the family agrees that John was completely in the wrong and that someone finally standing up to him did everyone a service. Even John's girlfriend apparently decided she was done with the situation after that night. The whole family had been enduring this person and nobody had pushed back until this kid did. That detail matters more than it might seem at first, because it means the narrator did not just defend himself. He cracked something open that the whole room had been quietly hoping someone would crack open for a long time. Now let us talk about the verdict, because this one is not even close and never was. The narrator is not the asshole here, not even a little, not in any universe where accountability exists. John spent an entire evening targeting people for the things they love and the things that make them vulnerable. He went after a girlfriend with a health condition. He called a sister a whore. He insulted a mother. And he repeatedly, deliberately, across the entire span of a party, told someone that the animals they care for should be killed in graphic and specific ways. Every one of those things is a choice. Every one of those things is a form of cruelty. And John made all of those choices while expecting to face zero consequences. The rabbit comparison is particularly sharp and it is worth dwelling on because it cuts right to the center of what John was actually doing. He was not just expressing a dislike or a fear. He was asserting a hierarchy. He was saying that his preferences, his comfort, his worldview gets to decide what deserves to exist. That is an extraordinary thing to believe about yourself. And the narrator exposed exactly how hollow that logic is by turning it around. Your rabbit is not more deserving of life than my tarantula simply because you chose the rabbit. Love does not work that way. Care does not work that way. The value we place on animals is deeply personal and nobody, not one single person, gets to walk into a room and declare that another person's beloved companion deserves death and then be shocked when someone calls them out. What this narrator did was not just defend himself. He defended his girlfriend, his sister, his mother, and every other person John had been grinding down all night. He was the only one who said enough out loud. He was 17 years old, holding his temper for as long as he possibly could, and when he finally let it go he was pointed, he was accurate, and he said what everyone else in that room was already thinking. That is not ruining a birthday. That is giving someone a consequence they should have received years ago. John left his own party because he finally met someone who would not absorb his cruelty quietly. That is not a tragedy. That is long overdue. She gave a speech at my dad's funeral making it all about herself and I finally lost it. 9:30 p.m. She stood up at her own brother's funeral and made the speech about herself. And she had the nerve to do it again months later in front of the whole family. Some things you think you misheard. Some things you replay in your head hoping you got it wrong. But there was no getting this one wrong. Let us set the scene properly because the weight of this story requires it. The narrator's father passed away at 82 years old. It was not sudden. It was a long and painful decline that started 15 years earlier with a triple bypass heart surgery and kept going from there. Broken hips. A broken foot. Ulcers. Years upon years of medical crises stacking on top of each other until the last few months of his life became, in the narrator's own words, extremely hard on the whole family. But especially hard on the people who were actually there. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that sets in when you have been watching someone you love deteriorate slowly over years. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It just quietly hollows you out, appointment by appointment, crisis by crisis, until you barely remember what your life looked like before it was organized around someone else's survival. And when the narrator says actually there, that phrase is carrying a lot of weight that is about to become very important. Because the narrator was the one driving his father to multiple doctor's appointments per week. Not occasionally. Not when it was convenient. Multiple times per week, consistently, which means canceled plans, canceled trips, rearranged entire sections of their own life to make sure their father got where he needed to go. Think about what that actually looks like on the ground. It means sitting in waiting rooms for hours with a man who is in pain and scared, even when he cannot always articulate that he is scared. It means learning the names of every specialist, every medication, every side effect. It means being the person your father looks at when a doctor delivers bad news, because you are the one who showed up. And the mother, she became a full-time caretaker. Changing bandages. Managing medications. Being physically present through all of it. That is not something you do halfway. That is an all-consuming commitment that reshapes every part of your daily life and quietly takes a toll on you even when you choose it willingly, even when you love the person you are caring for completely. You stop sleeping well. You stop making future plans because the future feels unstable. You pour yourself into someone else so completely that when they are finally gone, you are not even sure what is left. So when the funeral comes and the officiant opens the floor for people to speak, the aunt stands up. This is the narrator's father's sister. And she gives a speech. And the speech is, by the narrator's description, kind of odd. Because it is not really about the father. It is about her. She talks about how much she was there. How much she helped. How tough it was for her. How glad she is that she was able to be present for him in his final months. Picture the narrator sitting in the front row, still raw, still exhausted from years of showing up, and hearing this woman at the microphone rewrite the entire history of the last decade and a half into a story where she was a central figure. That specific kind of disbelief, the one where you are not even sure whether to be angry or just stunned, sits in your chest like something cold. And she is saying all of this with a kind of warmth and self-congratulation that lands completely wrong in a room full of people who know exactly what actually happened. I am sorry, but at a funeral. At the man's own funeral. What the aunt's version of being there looked like was calling him to talk on the phone for an hour every few weeks. And coming into town for a few days here and there to visit. That is it. That is the full sum of her contribution. And to be very clear, there is nothing wrong with that on its own. Not everyone lives close. Not everyone has the capacity to drop everything. Phone calls and visits are real and they matter, and no one is saying she should feel nothing about losing her brother. Grief does not require a receipt. But there is an enormous and unbridgeable gap between making phone calls and being the person who reorganized their entire life to keep someone alive. One of those things costs you your evenings and your convenience. The other costs you years. And she stood at that podium and she collapsed that gap completely. She presented herself as a co-caretaker when she was not. She claimed a level of sacrifice that belonged to other people. And she did it at the funeral, in front of everyone, while the people who actually gave up years of their lives were sitting in the front row listening to her take a bow. And then here is the part that really reveals the character of what happened. After the father passed, the aunt did not call once. Not to check on the mother who had just lost her husband of decades and her entire daily purpose as a caretaker, a woman who was now supposed to figure out who she was outside of the role that had consumed her completely. Not to check on the sister. Not to check on the narrator. Not one call. Think about that silence for a moment. This is a person who just gave a speech about how meaningful her connection was, how present she had been, how much this family meant to her. And then she went completely quiet the moment the audience was gone and there was no one left to perform for. So this is a person who was willing to stand up at a funeral and paint herself as a devoted and present figure in her brother's life, but who then went completely silent the moment there was no audience and no credit to collect. That is a meaningful pattern. That tells you something real about what the motivation was. Months go by and then the family is at another gathering and the aunt starts up again. Same story. Same version of events where she was the hero of her brother's final chapter. Same warmth in her voice, same comfortable confidence, as if repetition had turned the fiction into fact in her own mind. And the narrator, who has been sitting with this grief and this frustration for months, who has watched their mother carry the weight of real caregiving without a single word of acknowledgement from this woman, who has had to hold the memory of those years alongside a version of events that completely erases them, makes the decision to stop it. Not out of cruelty. Not out of wanting a fight. But because there is a point at which staying quiet stops feeling like grace and starts feeling like surrender. What the narrator said was precise and it was fair. Calling someone on the phone is not caregiving. When you give up your life, change your schedule, drive someone to doctor after doctor, week after week, then you can talk about what you sacrificed. Until then, the narrator told her, what she was saying was disrespectful and insulting at every level. Short sentences. Clear meaning. No room to be misunderstood. There it is. Somebody finally said it. Yes, it made things tense. Yes, the room got uncomfortable. That is what happens when a truth that everyone has been privately holding gets spoken out loud in public. Tension is not the same as wrongness. Discomfort is not the same as cruelty. The narrator is not the one who created this situation. The aunt created it the first time she stood at that microphone and rewrote the story of who was there. The narrator just refused to let the rewrite stand a second time. Now for the verdict, and this one matters because grief has a way of making people doubt themselves even when they are completely right. The narrator is not the asshole here. Full stop. Not at the funeral where they stayed quiet. Not at the family function where they finally spoke. Caregiving is one of the most invisible and exhausting forms of love that exists. It does not come with applause. It does not come with public recognition. It just comes with being there, day after day, when it is inconvenient and exhausting and emotionally depleting, and doing it anyway because you love someone. The narrator and their mother did that. They gave years of their lives to that work. And the aunt showed up at the funeral to take a bow for it. What the narrator did at that family function was not cruelty. It was correction. There is a version of this situation where the aunt gets to keep telling a false story at every gathering for the rest of her life and the people who were actually there have to sit quietly and listen to it. That is a version where the real caretakers are asked to protect someone else's ego at the expense of their own dignity and their grief. The narrator chose a different version. They chose the one where the record gets set straight, even if it is uncomfortable, even if it upsets the room, because some things are too important to let slide for the sake of keeping the peace. The final thing worth saying is this. The narrator says they still feel kind of bad about it. And that instinct to feel bad, that pull toward guilt even when you were right, is actually evidence of exactly the kind of character that made them the real caretaker in the first place. People who genuinely care about others feel the cost of conflict even when the conflict was necessary. The aunt, based on everything in this story, does not appear to feel that way. And that difference between them says more than anything else in this whole situation ever could. Drop a comment below telling me which story hit harder, the scorpion kid who finally snapped or the family member who set the record straight at the reunion. And if you want more stories like these, A like and subscribe would mean a lot.